The restaurant gleamed like a palace that night. Golden chandeliers dripped with light, crystal glasses shimmered on white linen tables, and the soft hum of piano music blended with the clinking of cutlery. It was the kind of place where wealthy elites gathered not just to eat, but to be seen. At the far corner, tucked into a booth with two associates, sat Richard Hanley, a billionaire who could bend markets with a word. He wore an immaculate black suit, but his expression carried the weariness of a man who had won too much to still feel satisfied. Richard had seen countless faces come and go in restaurants like this, but tonight his eyes caught on someone unusual. Maria, a young waitress with a neat ponytail and a simple smile, moved gracefully from table to table. There was nothing flashy about her, her uniform was the same as the others, her steps unhurried, but she radiated a composure that was hard to miss. While most servers flitted nervously under the weight of impatient customers, Maria never faltered. Her voice was soft but clear, her movements precise, and her smile carried warmth that seemed genuine. What Richard couldn't know was that beneath that calm exterior, Maria was fighting her own battles. Every morning before coming to work, she stopped at the hospital to see her mother, who had been bedridden for months. The bills were piling up, the doctors were losing patience, and Maria's paycheck barely scratched the surface of what was needed. Still, she carried that burden silently, hiding it under polite greetings and quiet kindness. To her, fear and stress were luxuries she couldn't afford to show. Richard's associate leaned in, interrupting his thoughts. "Sir, about the merger documents." But Richard's gaze drifted again to the young waitress as she bent down to reassure an elderly couple about their order. Something about her poise fascinated him. She reminded him of no one he could place, yet she held herself with a dignity he had rarely seen even among powerful executives. Then, everything changed in an instant. The grand double doors of the restaurant slammed open with a deafening bang. A man in a black ski mask stormed inside, brandishing a gun. His voice cracked like thunder as he shouted, "Nobody move. Get down, now." The piano music screeched to a halt. Guests screamed and scrambled under tables, knocking over glasses and silverware in their panic. The sound of breaking plates mingled with terrified cries. The billionaire, who had once commanded boardrooms full of trembling CEOs, now sat frozen in shock. His mind raced, but for the first time in years, Richard felt powerless. The gunman's presence sucked the air from the room. He waved the weapon wildly, eyes darting as though he were trapped between desperation and rage. "I need the money," he barked, his voice trembling. "Give me everything, now." Waiters dropped trays and ran for cover. A mother shielded her child under a tablecloth. Even the restaurant's security hesitated, hands hovering uncertainly, afraid of provoking the man. Amid the chaos, only one person didn't break. Maria. She had been carrying a tray of drinks to a table when the gunman burst in. For a split second, her heart thudded hard in her chest, but she forced her breathing to steady. She gently lowered the tray onto a nearby counter, the glassware clinking softly, and turned to face the man. Her hands were empty, her posture calm, her expression free of panic. The gunman's eyes locked onto her. Perhaps it was because she was standing, while everyone else cowered. Perhaps it was because she didn't scream or hide. Whatever the reason, he swung the gun directly at her, shouting, "You don't move." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman sobbed into her husband's chest. Even Richard, who had seen crises that toppled nations, gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. But Maria didn't tremble. She met the man's gaze with steady eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and low, carrying none of the hysteria that filled the room. "You don't have to do this," she said. The words landed like a foreign language. The gunman blinked, startled. His hand wavered, just slightly. "Shut up," he barked, though his voice cracked. Maria didn't flinch. She took a slow step forward, her movements deliberate, her tone gentle but unwavering. "I can see you're scared. But pointing that gun won't fix what you're going through." Whispers rose among the diners hidden under tables. Was she insane? Why wasn't she running? Even Richard felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest as he watched, unable to look away. The gunman's breathing grew harsh. His hands trembled. For a second, it seemed as if he might fire just to silence her. But Maria's calmness seemed to cut through the panic that gripped him. She wasn't defying him, and she wasn't begging. She was humanizing him. The robber shook his head violently. "You don't know anything about me." he shouted, though his voice carried the edge of pain more than anger. Maria took another slow breath, keeping her hands slightly raised in openness. Then tell me, she said softly. Because whatever made you walk in here like this, it must be heavy. But this isn't the way to carry it. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. No one dared move. Even the chandeliers seemed frozen. The gunman's eyes flickered, and his shoulders slumped just slightly, betraying a crack in the hard shell he had wrapped himself in. From the shadows of his booth, Richard felt a shock ripple through him. This young woman, this waitress with nothing, was showing more courage than anyone he had ever met. In his world, power was measured in billions, in influence, in control. Yet here was someone who had none of that, standing face to face with death, and instead of fear, she chose compassion. It was then, Richard realized, that he was witnessing something rare, something that money could never buy. And in the next moments, something would happen that would leave not just the restaurant, but the entire world, stunned. The restaurant was silent except for the ragged breathing of the gunman. His hand shook as the weapon wavered between Maria and the crowd. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, but the only gaze he could feel was hers. Steady, calm, unafraid. Maria didn't move quickly or recklessly. She simply breathed with intention, her voice a soft current against the storm. You don't want this, she whispered, almost as though speaking to herself. Hurting people won't take away your pain. The man's jaw tightened. His mask couldn't hide the tremor in his lips or the glistening of tears forming at the edges of his eyes. He barked, "Don't tell me what I want." But the words cracked, fragile, betraying desperation more than authority. Richard Hanley, still hunched low in his booth, felt his heart thudding in a way he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't fear for his life, though he had every reason to be afraid, but awe. He was watching a single, ordinary waitress command the attention of a man armed with death itself, not by force, not by wealth, but by the raw power of compassion. Maria took a careful step forward, palms open in front of her chest. I know you're desperate, she said softly. People don't make choices like this unless they feel trapped. But I promise you, this isn't the only way out. The man's grip faltered. His breathing grew heavier, almost like a sob. He muttered through clenched teeth, You don't understand, my kids, they're hungry. I can't, there's no work. No help. I've got nothing left. Gasps swept through the hidden crowd. The revelation pierced the image of a monster, replacing it with something painfully human. Richard's mind caught on those words, my kids, hungry. He had built empires of excess, watched billions flow like water through his hands, while men like this fell through the cracks, left with nothing but despair. Maria's eyes softened even more. I do understand, she said. And she meant it. Memories of her mother's frail body in a hospital bed, of the envelopes filled with overdue bills stacked on her nightstand, of the nights she cried quietly so her mother wouldn't hear, all of it rose in her chest. I know what it's like to feel cornered. But pulling this trigger won't feed them. It'll only take you away from them forever. The gunman's shoulders shook. His hands dropped a fraction, the weapon still in his grip but no longer aimed with purpose. Look at me, Maria urged, her voice steady as stone. I'm not afraid of you. Because I see more than the mask, more than the gun. I see a father who doesn't want to be here. Please, don't let this moment define you. The man's eyes locked onto hers, and for a long, excruciating second, the entire restaurant held its breath. Then, slowly, as if the weight of the world was dragging him down, he lowered the gun. A stunned silence fell, broken only by the sound of his sobs. He dropped to his knees, the weapon slipping from his hand and clattering onto the floor. Maria bent down calmly, picked up the gun with care, and placed it on the nearest table out of his reach. The room erupted, not with cheers, but with cries of relief. People clung to each other, sobbing, whispering prayers, gasping at what they had just witnessed. The security guards rushed forward, but Maria raised her hand firmly, stopping them. Don't hurt him, she said. He's done. The gunman buried his face in his hands as officers stormed in moments later, alerted by silent alarms. They cuffed him gently, still stunned at how peacefully the situation had ended. One officer shook his head in disbelief. I've never seen anything like that, he muttered. Maria simply stepped back, her composure unbroken. She returned to the counter, almost as though she were about to pick up her tray and continue working. But every eye followed her, wide with awe. The following morning, the story was everywhere. Guests had captured shaky videos on their phones, clips of Maria standing tall in front of the gunman, her voice calm while the world panicked. News anchors replayed it endlessly. Headlines screamed, "Waitress disarms gunman with words. The calm that stopped a bullet. Hero in an apron." Maria was bombarded with interview requests, offers of reward money, and even job opportunities. Strangers sent letters thanking her for showing courage that governments and armies often failed to show. Social media crowned her a global hero. But Maria herself remained unchanged. She still wore her uniform. She still visited her mother at the hospital every morning. And when asked how she had done it, she answered simply, "Because he was just as scared as we were." Somebody had to remind him he was human. Richard Hanley, however, was changed forever. He couldn't sleep that night. Her words, "Somebody had to remind him he was human," echoed in his head. He thought about the man in the mask, driven to crime by hunger. He thought about Maria, a waitress with nothing, who had shown strength greater than all the power his billions could buy. The next day, he requested a private meeting with her. Maria, hesitant but polite, agreed. She arrived in her simple clothes, her posture the same calm grace she carried even in the face of danger. Richard studied her for a long moment before speaking. His voice, for once, carried no authority, only sincerity. "Why didn't you run? You could have saved yourself." Maria smiled faintly. "Because everyone else was already running. Someone had to stand still." Her answer hit him like a truth he had been avoiding his whole life. In all his years of building empires, he had run, from empathy, from connection, from the kind of courage that had nothing to do with money. "Maria," he said quietly, "you didn't just save lives in that restaurant. You saved mine, in a way. You reminded me what real strength looks like." In the weeks that followed, Richard announced the launch of the Maria Foundation, a global initiative to combat poverty and desperation, the very conditions that had driven the masked man to crime. The foundation provided food banks, housing assistance, debt relief, and healthcare programs for struggling families. Richard publicly credited Maria as the inspiration, insisting that her courage had opened his eyes to the true use of wealth. The world watched in astonishment. A billionaire, known for his ruthless business tactics, transformed by a single waitress. And Maria herself, she declined fame and fortune. She kept working at the restaurant, humbly serving customers, though now they looked at her with reverence. Her story wasn't about money or recognition. It was about a moment where fear met compassion, and compassion won. Years later, when people retold the story, they didn't just talk about the billionaire or the masked gunman. They talked about Maria, the young woman in an apron, who, when staring down the barrel of a gun, chose kindness instead of fear. And in doing so, she stunned not only a room full of strangers. She stunned the entire world.